Hello and welcome to Humber Mouth, the Hull Literature Festival. I'm Jennifer Hodgson, the festival's reader in residence this year. And although we can't be together in Hull in person at the moment, nevertheless, I'm really pleased to be hosting this series of events over Zoom over the next few weeks, welcoming some of the very best contemporary writers to Hull, or at least this version of Hull, the Hull of our imagination, I'm calling it. These events were originally scheduled to take place in spring 2020. So I should kick off by saying thanks to all the writers who've been so willing to reschedule and participate in this new and slightly different way. For the first of our series, we are joined by Deborah Levy. Deborah is the author of 7 novels: Beautiful Mutants, Swallowing Geography, The Unloved, Billy and Girl, Swimming Home, Hot Milk, and The Man Who Saw Everything. She has been shortlisted for the Goldsmiths Prize and the Man Booker Prize. Her short story collection, Black Vodka, was broadcast on BBC Radio 4, as were her acclaimed dramatisations of Freud's iconic case studies, Dora and the Wolfman. She's also the author of an innovative and emotionally daring trilogy of memoirs. The final instalment of this trilogy, Real Estate, will be published in May by Hamish Hamilton. This living autobiography explores writing, gender politics, and philosophy. And the first 2 volumes, Things I Don't Want to Know and The Cost of Living, won the Prix Féminin Étranger in 2020. So Deborah, welcome to Hull.
Hello, Jen. Lovely
Hi.
backdrop.
Yeah, I just thought I'd bring some glamour on this February day.
Well, yeah, we want a writer to come through it in a glamorous costume.
I really wish that I had arranged this. I really do. It would be remiss of us to start by not mentioning the sort of peculiar and ongoing circumstances that we find ourselves in. I wonder how you're faring, Deborah, and how lockdown's been.
Lockdown, well, Jen, this morning, as you know, we were due to begin, and our Zoom, which I am very much looking forward to. And I live in a flat. They started to dig up the car park, and so I had to phone up a friend and hop on my bicycle and use her flat. So that's one example of lockdown. It's weird, isn't it? I mean, we all just feel so flattened by it, and life is really dull. But I find that how things make me laugh. Maybe becoming simple-minded. Like I went to the Chippy last Friday to get my daughter and myself cotton chips, and the woman said to me, "Do you want a lunchtime cod or a cod?" I just stopped laughing. I saw this sort of cartoon with 2 fish swimming together, and one says to the other, "Are you a lunchtime or a cod?" And and then on the wall was a photograph of Twiggy,
Right.
tucking into fish and chips in full makeup. And I just thought, what a wonderful way to eat your fish and chips. And I took a photo of that. I'm keeping a diary, nothing, 6 lines a day. It's incredibly dull, my diary. But in fact, it's so dull that it's almost interesting, if you know what I mean. Bought 2 onions, that sort of thing. Some writers say to me it makes no difference to them, and I don't understand it, because obviously I'm used to spending a lot of time on my own. The writing life is a solitary life, and hours and 6 in the morning to all through the day to when you're finishing a book into the early hours. So that's not it, but it's a bit like sort of staring out and feeling that the world has become a global sanatorium, and that it's very hard to sort of put a sentence together. But there we go.
Mm-hmm.
This too will pass, Jen, we hope.
Thank you, Deborah. I hope so. And it's funny that you should mention cod, because, of course, you know, we are in the hull of the imagination. And I had hopes to arrange a kind of cod banner behind us in deference to our, you know, Hull proud heritage. But I didn't manage that for you today, so I'm sorry.
Lunchtime or a cod?
Sorry?
Is it a lunchtime or a cod?
It's probably both.
Yeah, yeah,
Probably both.
yeah.
But with your talking about the way that writers, I guess, draw on their own experiences in their writing, and also you mentioned keeping a diary at the moment. I guess that kicks off our first question, and I wanted to ask about the way that you've kind of turned your attentions towards memoir in the last 7 or 8 years. You've obviously continued writing your fiction as well, but you've begun what you've called a living autobiography, and I wanted to ask what had prompted that, and also what kind of change that represents and has represented in your writing process, if at all, this kind of direct drawing on your own experience.
Yeah. In some ways, I think my novels are more autobiographical than my
Interesting.
living autobiographies. So what prompted them was Jacques Testard, who was one of the co-founders of the White Review, who then went on to be a commissioning editor for Notting Hill Editions, asking me if I wanted to write an essay. He said, I think Swimming Home had just been nominated for the Booker, and it was very, very busy. And he said to me, well, do you want 27,000 words or 47,000 words? So I said, well, what about 5? And he said 5,000. He said, no, it has to be, go for 27,000. So I'd had George Orwell's Why I Write on my bookshelf for a while. And I took it down and I read it just to find out why it was there, really. It was one of the, I don't know if you have this, you have books on your shelves that you actually haven't read. It's a very short essay. I think it's only about 6 pages. And so he had these interesting headings for his motivation to write: political purpose, historical impulse, sheer egoism, aesthetic pleasure. So as soon as you type political purpose onto the screen, something happens. It'll happen to you. It'll happen to anyone watching this. Because I was writing in the first person. And I thought, that's an interesting voice. It's something, it interested me because I didn't know I had it in me. It was very discursive. It was intimate, but it was formal. And off I went. So I stole Orwell's headings, and gave them a spin from a female writer's point of view, and I discovered that sort of thought streams and memory and arguments and fury and tenderness could all coexist in this first person voice. And then I also began to realize that it could be a mashup of travel writing, of philosophy, of politics, of all kinds of things. And it suited me very well. I felt that I could go in quite deep and lightly into something that is a living autobiography, in the sense that, you know, it was written in the storm of life, in the present tense. It's not nostalgic. It's not looking back with hindsight. I can't bear wisdom. That's the thing.
I can't bear wisdom. That's interesting.
No, you know, the idea that that as you get older, you get wiser. I just really don't think it's true. you're as wise as how intensely you feel something,
Mm-hmm.
my view, because there's no point in being kind of numb
Mm-hmm.
and wise. So you feel things very strongly at 7, you know, and at 15, and that gives you some that intensity gives you some wisdom. So I didn't want to. So hindsight isn't my favorite kind of sight.
Mm.
And so I was discovering things about the present and the near past as I was writing it. Then um, when I began Things I Don't Want to Know, which has been translated into French as What I Don't Want to Know, which I like a lot.
Mm.
When I got to historical impulse, Orwell's heading, I thought, well, if you're going to steal another writer's headings, you've got to honor that historical impulse. So I went back for the very first time to my childhood in South Africa. My family had left South Africa when I was 9, and I grew up in England ever since. And that was that's as far back as I go, you know, and that was very strange to revisit, painful.
Mm.
And then I wanted to continue it. So Real Estate is the title of the final one.
Uh-huh.
That's out in May. And that sort of nominally looks at ownership in the in the biggest sense of the word, not just property, but what we own in life, what we might claim, what we discard, all of that.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like this move to the first person has been a really liberating one. Like you said when you were talking about beginning the project that you didn't know you had it in you. This kind of move to the first person seems to have enabled you to kind of access areas of inquiry that you couldn't previously. Is that the case?
It's really interesting to write something essayistic in the first person. I mean, I know it's quite common now, and I know there's a tradition of it. But, you know, we didn't write essays at school or university, in my day, in the first person.
Yeah.
So as soon as you write political purpose, historical impulse, sheer egoism in the first person, it somehow becomes very political and playful as well. So the third person, Swimming Home is written in the third person. That's got a lovely sort of, that gives the writer a sort of aerial view over the proceedings, which is really useful. I mean, I love the way Rob Grier uses the third person, has a sort of, you know, a forensic kind of scrutiny you can build up. But it wasn't going to be right for the living autobiographies, no.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting too, the title that you chose for the first installment. As you say, you drew on you were inspired by Orwell's project, but you know his is called Why I Write, and yours is called Things I Don't Want to Know, which is kind of at odds. And I wonder to what extent that that title could be you know, informs so much of your writing. This kind of pushing up against areas of resistance, ugly feelings within the self, and managing to encounter those areas in some ways. Does that preoccupy you at all?
Yeah, well, the things I don't want to know are the things that we repress, the things that we know anyway.
Mm.
So it's a bit like a bill comes through the post and you put it on a cupboard. I mean, you know it's there, you know what's inside it, but you don't want to open it. So Freud's idea that when you have this sort of feeling of this sort of anxiety, what would you call it, a sort of a sense of foreboding. He's very comforting about this. He says it's actually already happened. The thing you most dread has actually already happened, and so why not open that bill, you know? And but in terms of fiction, it's just so dull if characters know things all the time. The reader has to be more knowing than a character in fiction, or an argument in fiction. That's the skill of the writer, really, to pull the reader in so that they actually kind of know more than anyone else in the book. That's what writing is for me, and that's quite hard to describe. You know, how do you go about that? So I don't want there's absolutely no pleasure for me in reading fiction, or actually anything in which the writer wants to convey to me how many clever books they've read. If anything, they have to disguise how many clever books they've read. They've got to embody their ideas. They have to make them alluring and relevant, and they have to have a purpose. So so that's always interesting to me. So the things we don't want to know are all the things that we know, and hopefully sort of well, how can I put it? It's a trick, isn't it? Because the writing trick is readers. You know, when I read, I want to know more, and if I don't want to know more, I just put the book down.
Mm-hmm. This thing about knowing and knowledge and uncertainty seems to be something that you come back to again and again in your work. It seems to me often that that if your characters are redeemed at all, it's by arriving in a state where they no longer know themselves, where they sort of surrender to uncertainty and stop trying to know everything, and they become uncertain. Sorry.
That's so true, Jen. I think that just made me laugh when you said it, because
Right.
I suppose the idea of fiction, isn't it, is that we know ourselves better. And this is a flip. I mean, it's not that I want to. It's not like uncertainty is something brilliant. It's really terrible uncertainty. Look at the pandemic and how we're all living with immense uncertainty. It's really tricky. But certainty in that sort of fixed way that shuts everything else that is interesting out of fiction. All those in-between moments of doubt, of the irrational, of superstition, of ridiculous anxiety. They said such an interesting subject that I really honor in my fiction, I hope, all the things that we're supposed to leave out. So there is absolutely nothing that interesting about an entirely certain dogmatic kind of person or book, except for the idea that the only people who are absolutely convinced they're certain are usually psychopaths. You know, so in my fiction, there's a search for something. There's a search for pleasure, purpose, for meaning, for connection. One of the things I learned one of the things that interested me was how the avant-garde, who are my art brothers and sisters and everything, my art family, really distrusted emotion.
Mm.
It was like emotion was the bit above it. It was for lesser folk.
Yeah.
And so it took me a while to be able to figure out, and I think it began really with Swimming Home, perhaps with Billy and Girl too, um, how to um, just how to blaze feeling
Mm.
into the work in ways that weren't sentimental, that weren't begging, that weren't there to ask readers to like characters or do anything. So except want to know more. That's the only point of reading, is to want to know more.
Mm-hmm. It makes me think of a story of yours that I like very much called Conversations with Famous Artists, from a short story collection from a while ago called, for the benefit of our viewers, Pillow Talk in Europe and Other Places. And the in it, you describe something called Ingrid Mainz syndrome. And I have a confession to make, Deborah, because back in the day when I was a very sad, very bored academic, I took a photo of a page from that story on my phone, and I used to look at it every now and again for courage to try, because I felt like a kind of brain in a jar that was locked in a cupboard, and I was worried that I was Ingrid Mainz, that I'd become this person who had this kind of obsessive kind of life of the mind, and I'd forgotten how to be a body and how to be in the world.
Yeah, well, I'm really flattered, Jen, that you took a photo of it. So that's from a story called Conversations with Famous Artists. I don't know. Is that right?
Yeah, I have it here.
Um, I have
Right here.
or I have never known. Oh yeah, so that was published by Dorky Archives. That's Mina Loy on the cover. Such a murky cover, isn't it? But that's
Kind of
Mina
smoky.
Loy, and yeah. So that is really a disguised point by Simone de Beauvoir.
Mm-hmm.
I really love in Memoirs of a Dutiful Daughter, the part one of Beauvoir's autobiography, when she says, "Be loved." She goes on to say, be necessary, have
Mm-hmm.
purpose, but um, but be loved was incredibly important to me, because it seemed to me it was sort of left out of
Mm.
of the conversation. And so it's a bit of a tall notion, oh, go out and be loved. But that's not really it, is it? It's just sort of saying, yes, that is part of this conversation. So the book is called Conversation with Artists I've Never Known. Um, and I felt that it was a gap uh,
Right.
in the experimental work of my generation.
Mm. This thing about beloved, the Simone de Beauvoir, it immediately brings to mind the character Sophia from Hot Milk,
Mm.
in which she's given a gift by her lover, and it's embroidered with the word beloved, which quickly she realizes later is something else, or appears to be something else. And beloved, she realizes is the word beheaded, and that's an interesting little switch as well. Beloved and beheaded.
Yeah, so Ingrid, her lover, sort of she embroiders words and images onto cloth, and she almost has a sort of free association of words. And so her word for Sophia is beloved. And the point there is that Sophia is just really reading what she wants to read. She's seeing what she wants to see. And there's also a point about, I was also looking at the Medea myth. No, I wasn't, not in that one. The Medusa myth are very different myths.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to read you a bit about that, actually.
Yeah, please do.
So, so you know, how might you use a myth? Not in a spiritual way, not in a mythical way. How would you sort of bring it into the body? How would you bring it into the intellectual arguments of the novel? Because all novels have their intellectual arguments. It's not all about feeling things. So Sophia has just spent an afternoon with her lover Ingrid, and they're coming out into the driveway, and they meet Leonardo, who is Ingrid's riding teacher. He was smoking a cigarette and looking at Ingrid. Then his gaze shifted to me. I moved my hair out of my eyes. I could feel him slipping something to me in his gaze, like a dodgy drug deal in a pub when someone slips a wad of banknotes to someone else. He was threatening me. He was telling me he did not have a high opinion of what he was looking at, that I was someone who must be cut down to a size he could manage to frighten with his eyes, which were the avatars of his mind. So that's how I'm using the Medusa myth in Hot Milk. Yeah.
Right. And because you're very interested, I mean, not just in myth, but in all of the kinds of narratives and stories that underpin our lives, aren't you? It seems to me in there's ones that we're that we make for ourselves, and also that there's ones that are kind of forced upon us. I mean, you talk in The Cost of Living, you put it as growing up in the old patriarchal story and the struggle to compose a new one. And in Hot Milk itself as well, I think Sophia says, I am anti the major plots, doesn't she? And this struggle to live amongst these existing stories that are imposed upon you, and also the effort to try and create your own in resistance to them. It seems to me that you're really interested in that as well.
Yeah, I'm interested in anything that will help my arguments. That will
Right.
give. I mean, you know, not necessarily just myth, but if they support and give my arguments more dimension, then I will obviously use them. And myth does come up again, I must admit, in real estate. I was about to quote from that, but I realize I can't because it's not actually published yet. Yeah, so yes, Jan. I mean, you know this. Just absolutely anything that helps. I mean, sometimes because I know that you are a massive Anne Quinn fan and have put together this incredible collection of her stories and writing. And that's an amazing thing to have done, you know. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Valuable.
This is about you, Deborah, not about me. But
no,
thank you.
It's such a the unmapped country.
Yeah, it's called The Unmapped Country.
Such a valuable thing to have done with your life, to have gone through all those boxes and letters, put together Quinn's writing. I'm so admiring of you, Jen. But anyway, sometimes when I'm stuck and I'm writing, I go to I pick up Quinn's novel passages.
Right.
And I just open up a page anywhere because somehow it opens my mind. You know, it's so anti-story. it's Quinn has a complete conviction of ideas. She's so intent on trying to capture on the page what's happening in her mind. And then she, that's not enough because her writing is so crafted. I think she, maybe you know more than I do, but just seems to me draft after draft, it's very sort of composed. So she helps, you know, it's just like, oh, thank you, Anne Quinn. It's just that's just a page. Or I might open up a bit of Marx or Freud or Zabald or Juna Barnes or whatever, but mostly it's music that I listen to that gives me the tone.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Say again.
How does that work? How does that work for you?
I wish I understood it.
Oh, yeah.
So mostly because it's mood,
right?
Mostly because it's a tone, mostly because actually in music the words don't really matter. So sometimes it's just a sort of there might be something that's just sort of full of yearning, or just feels erotic. And I play it because it sort of helps me find my mood. So language, written language, as opposed to the language of music, seems to me as actually, yeah. So I suppose what I'm really saying is that there is this idea that language is this fixed, dead thing. But you find you start to work with it, and you find out what you're going to do with it, and that's it. But actually, if you really engage with language, and you engage and you're interested in how people speak and the words they choose, and what they don't say, and all of that, it's sort of like an endless project of something alive and changing all the time. It's very important for language, in my view, not to have a fixed behavior.
Right.
So if you look at a realist novel and you see how it's made, you can see that it behaves in a certain way. If you look at a structure of what's called experimental writing, you can see it behaves in a certain way. And that fascinates me. But I don't want my writing to behave in any way that does not, in a way that sort of works against what I'm trying to convey. So I'm never going to not use anything that is useful to the work. So, for example, when I began Swimming Home, I began to realize that you cannot subvert a reality if you don't create a reality.
Interesting. Okay.
In the first place, that became a project for me onwards, from Swimming Home through to Hot Milk to The Man Who Saw Everything, where the palette is the realist novel that you can then put your hand through, as it were, and begin to rearrange.
So you're building a familiar world and then destroying it.
You're not really just
not destroying it.
You might destroy it, but you sort of have to construct it, in my view. That's what interests me at this moment in time. So Quinn doesn't construct a real world, say, in passages.
Yeah.
It's sort of, but that's not my game. And I think I think filmmakers taught me more than novelists. So David Lynch really taught me more about the mood I wanted to create in my novels than anyone else. So if you have so if you just look at Blue Velvet, for example, you might have manicured grass, you have the white picket fence, you have an old guy coming out with a hose pipe, and then the camera goes, so that's the reality, that's been composed, there it is, and then the camera goes right under the grass,
Yeah.
right inside the man, and into the mouth, into the beak of a bird. That really interests me. If I can do that.
Yeah, it's like the other world that's amongst our world in some way. It's interesting that you mentioned Anne Quinn, the British 60s writer, because another thing that you both seem to have in common is you both in your writing seem very drawn to heat, sunshine, arid landscapes. Like I've got in my notes just the word heat seeking. And it seems to me that, you know, often your books will be more or less kind of rooted in London and in the UK, but their bearings are really set for somewhere else, frequently Southern Europe, south of France, southern Spain, South America. And there's something that really attracts you about those kinds of landscapes and those kinds of settings. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So I think my last 4 books are kind of set out of Britain, aren't they? Yeah, starting with Swimming Home, set in the French Riviera, in the hills above Nice, and Hot Milk in southern Spain, and The Man Who Saw Everything in East Berlin, 1988, and in America, and in Britain, in London. So yes, I am drawn to heat. I'm drawn to swimming in the heat. I am drawn, they are the landscapes and the moods that I like to write about. It's so sensual and dizzying somehow. But more seriously, I think it's an old trick. It's like Forster and James took their American and English characters out of America and Britain, you put them elsewhere, and it's just a way of looking more closely at behavior in an unfamiliar place. So it's already quite destabilizing. You know, Sophia and her mum are not in their house in Hackney. They're having to figure out everything in the south of Spain. And when Kitty Finch arrives in Swimming Home from London, apparently, so she sort of brings London with her to the Riviera. It just suits me much better to work like that.
I wonder if you would read to us from Swimming Home, a book that's set in one of those landscapes.
Yeah, okay. So here's a moment when Kitty Finch, who is a young, clever, fragile young woman, who in a way, Jen, is sort of like Anne Quinn, the 1960s writer, was sort of in my mind for Kitty Finch. It's not like she is her in any way at all, but the title Swimming Home came from an obituary I read for Anne Quinn, which said that Anne Quinn went for a swim and never returned. That really stayed with me. So Kitty Finch arrives in the south of France. She gate crashes a family holiday, and she's got something for the leading male character, who's called Joe Jacobs, who is a poet, to read. She wants him to read something she's written, and he won't read it. But he has opened up an envelope at this point that he's chucked under his bed, and he's got he sort of gazed at it, and he's got the first three lines, and the first three lines she's written are, "My mother says I'm the only jewel in her crown, but now I've made her tired with all my etc. So now she walks with sticks." So he's looked at that, but he hasn't looked at everything else, because he knows what's in that writing. Okay, so I'm not trying not to give any spoilers to people. So the book is really about the death drive. Okay, if he couldn't talk to her about her poem, what good was he? He might as well move to the countryside and run the tombola stall at the church fete. He might as well take up writing stories set in the declining years of empire. She was an astute reader, and she was troubled, and she had suicidal thoughts. But then, what did he want his readers to be like? Were they required to eat all their vegetables, have a regular monthly salary and pension fund, with gym membership and a loyalty card to their favorite supermarket? Her gaze, the adrenaline of it, was like a stain. The etceteras in her poem, a bright light, a high noise. And if this wasn't terrifying enough, her attention to the detail of every day was even more so, to pollen and to struggling trees and the instincts of animals, to the difficulties of pretending to be relentlessly sane, to the way he walked, to the nuance of mood and feeling in them all. She was as receptive as it was possible to be, an explorer, an adventurer, a nightmare. Every moment with her was a kind of emergency.
Thanks. That's wonderful. It's so interesting, that section, because you've got a man who's an established poet feeling completely threatened by a woman who is not an established poet, but feeling threatened by her attention, her openness to the world, her receptivity, the kind of intensity of her feeling. It seems to kind of terrify him.
It does. She believes that she's in telepathy with him, that she can read his thoughts. And that is sort of what writing and reading is too. We sort of that reading between the lines is an example of that. We want to know what the writer's gate, what's going to happen. So we're second guessing. You're sort of in telepathy with the writer in a way. So he's terrified of that. But Joe Jacobs, for various reasons, for historical reasons, has a sort of death wish, and she knows that. She's got him.
Yeah.
And he's absolutely terrified of him, of his own desires. At the same time, just to make it more complicated, as novelists must do, she is a sort of object of his desire. She never really becomes a subject in his view. He really fancies her, but she's not well. So if he was to lay a finger on Kitty Finch, what sort of man does that make him? So that's also going on in the book, because a book without desire in it, without awkward desire in it, as well as every other kind of desire, is sort of a depressed book.
It's funny that you mentioned about the that in part Swimming Home is a book about the death drive, and it seems that the death drive figures in a lot of your writing, but um, you frequently seem to be concerned with characters who have died before they've died, with a kind of state of with people who have found themselves in a sort of state of death in life, really, and what it takes to shake them out of that, in a sense.
Yeah, it's true. We can sort of, you know, we can sort of die of safety. We can die of never having taken a risk in our life. And I think you're referring to The Man Who Saw Everything there.
Mm.
Yeah. So that is set in a number of time zones, in a number of places, and it's exploring all that you say. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the character Rose in Hot Milk as well, who seems to have arrived in a sort of state of kind of psychosomatic repression that is so powerful that she's just, yeah, she, that there are kind of two kind of deaths operant, and the first is when you're still alive.
That's true, but she's witty, isn't she? She's
She
witty.
is. She
Um,
is, and
uh,
she's from near Hull, right?
she is.
Yeah,
She absolutely is. And
topical.
uh, yeah, so uh, Rose, she's a hypochondriac apparently. So the question is, well, what's wrong with her? What actually is wrong with her? So Sophia, her daughter, has been like a sort of girl detective on her mum's case since she was 4. What's wrong with mum? What's wrong with mum? Um, so she's a sort of detective of symptoms,
Mm.
other symptoms, and these symptoms do all the chattering for Rose. When I read from Hot Milk in America, there was an old doctor in the audience. He was really about 90, and he related completely to Rose. And he told me that when he first started out as a GP, he had a woman who was a total hypochondriac. She came in about 3 times a week, and anytime he got nearer to a sort of diagnosis, oh, those are migraines, um, she would then present many more exotic symptoms until she decided that he was no good and that she was going to go and find another practitioner. And he said to her, oh, please don't leave, you're my burden.
Ah, right.
Which was like really interesting to me. So like, who would actually write a novel about hypochondria? How do you make it interesting?
Mm.
Start, we all either are one or someone in our family is one. But what's interesting in the sort of reading around psychosomatic disease or illness is that is a sort of refusal to be pinned into a case history, to be pinned into one narrative. So the old-fashioned term for a doctor sort of listening to you, and you say, oh yeah, well, I've got a headache and a ringing in my ears, blah blah blah. And the doctor says, well, when did that start? And you say Tuesday. So that was called taking a narrative.
Right.
And so all those notes
Mm.
are sort of called taking a narrative. And a hypochondria, if one of the many things about it is a bit not to be pinned into a narrative, to say, oh, and another thing. So it's like a digression. It's like a story that is digressing all over the place, not
Mm.
really fixed.
Mm.
And it's,
Interesting.
yeah.
what it makes me think of just, thinking about symptoms and kind of the ways that we claim ownership of our own narratives and our stories about ourselves. It kind of makes me think of the way that families function in your books. Specifically, I mean, they function in many, many different ways. But one of those ways is as a kind of conduit for the passing down of intergenerational trauma, I guess. And what you track very often is the ways that kind of mutates and kind of erupts unexpectedly and transforms.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. So in The Man Who Saw Everything, Saul Adler, he's sort of androgynous, he's bisexual, he is not approved of by his Stalinist father, who he doesn't have any sort of manliness that is recognizable to his father. And so it's a bit like his father was the Berlin Wall put up between himself and his son, and that to get anywhere near his father, he had to climb over that wall, and there would be, guard dogs and all of that. So he actually has some knowledge of a psychological East Berlin, communist East Berlin, before he actually arrives. He arrives there. It is really interesting how we, I was going to say, how we infect each other with where with all the psychologies that made us who we are, and some of which we claim and some of which we have to run away from forever.
And I guess building on that topical theme, since we're getting topical now, in the cost of living, it seems to me like in that book you're most explicitly kind of exploring freedom and the attempts to kind of like grasp the nettle of your own life, and how that very often comes about as the result of a kind of period of suffering. I think you call it, in the opening pages, I think you call it a tempest. And it feels kind of appropriate to now to kind of like sway a little redemptive arc. And I wonder, that seems to be a trajectory of many of your characters. This kind of like they're kind of bewildered. There's a sort of voyage in the desert of their own suffering, and out of the end of it comes some form of freedom that might not be comfortable or picturesque, and it very often terrifies them. But that's what they're sort of tilting at in some way. And I wonder about your thoughts on kind of what kind of freedom that can be. What's at the end of that tempest?
Well, Jen, I don't respect wisdom.
No.
So what are we going to do about that? Okay, so what's the point? What's the point of life, and what's the point of writing, and what's the point of reading?
Yeah, let's go there, Deborah. It's time.
So all right. So it's to think freely.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as easy as it sounds. It really isn't, because thinking freely drives some people mad. To hold contradictory thoughts, to even two contradictory thoughts at the same time, that's great. I encourage it. Get another few in. Paradox, great, go for it. They're not intruding thoughts. They're there for you to to do something with, to learn something from, and to make great art from,
Mhm.
because that's really what we're about. So to think freely and to it is very difficult. I really mean that. I'm not uh, diluting how difficult it is. It's not like, hey, let's just all have some long stream of consciousness day. Absolutely not. That couldn't be less of what I do. But to be able to invite and coexist with the very, very interesting thoughts that you will have every day, tiny thoughts, don't have to be great revelations, and to do something with them, and to not delete them, and to not censor them or to judge them. That is the beginning of making something beautiful.
Thank you. I mean, you know, you said you don't do wisdom, but that feels very wise to me in whatever capacity you want to couch that. Last of all, so your living autobiography, it's a trilogy. Real Estate is the last of the trilogy. That must be kind of a weird thing to be writing a living autobiography and you know, to limit it like that. And I wonder about that, and I wonder what you're doing next.
Oh, well, I'll tell you what I'm doing next. So things I don't want to know, it's sort of like my 40s. The cost of living is my 50s. I'm now 60. So we have like 20 years of life in those 3 books. And I am doing two projects. One is I'm writing a book about Gertrude Stein.
Amazing.
It's called Mama of Dada. And
Right.
I'm also writing a novel on the subject of the double, of the doppelganger.
Ah, great. Super. Thanks
Yeah,
for that. So we'll draw to a close there. Thank you so much for joining us today, Deborah. I
thank
hope
you.
you I hope you enjoyed your visit to Hull, kind of.
Loved
Um,
it. And I hope that you're now going to walk through that beautiful backdrop,
as if it was stars in their eyes.
and something wonderful is going to happen to you.
We'll probably do that in you know, in post. We'll get that sorted for you. So yeah, thank you, Deborah, for joining us today. Deborah's new book, which is called Real Estate, will be out with Hamish Hamilton this May. And for us, the next Humber Mouth event will be with the writer and critical theorist Isabel Wagner, and that will be on the 25th of February. And you can book your free ticket at humbermouth.com. But thank you again, Deborah.
Thank you.
Bye.